So let's play with the cache. But before I do this, I just forget to do something. I will enable clamp to maximum. So I want to I don't want to increase or expand this bounding box bigger than we have. So this is like a limit. We can't make this container bigger. But again, our guest resize fluid dynamic create for us a nice function, because when we create this simulation, begin to work with that, it's create this container just around our density field. Okay, no more. So it will increase this container till our limits, not bigger than we need to have. And yeah, I think that 9 million is too small size. Let's play a little bit with that. Let's 0.5. And now we should have like 72. Well, 72 million, that's a little bit better. Okay, so still have some visualization stuff. You can see it's very blocky, but you understand that it's just preview. So go to cache setup, geometry, and using the smoke import. Dive inside, and I want to use the dop import geometry. Dop import field, not geometry. Dop import fields. And let's take our sim. Let's go to the smoke sim. And I want to grab my smoke object. So you know that I said that smoke object is like now a container. All right. So we can go by two ways. We define the dop network, and we need to select or the dop node, and it should be like smoke sim and then smoke object 1. So we can do like this, use this option, or we can use the default object, and this means that I can paste the name of any object inside of my dop network. So if I type smoke and a star, this means that all nodes which have a name smoke and etc. and have some information, we can import here for the caching. Okay, so now I want to choose a preset. We can apply this manually, but again, preset a little bit faster. So we can find many different presets for the smoke, liquid, pyro, flip fluid, upracing, particles, and etc. So I use smoke, definitely. I don't want to have a rest, and I definitely don't want to have a city like color, and mainly I won't use the temperature, mainly because for the smoke shader I need to have this density, but sometimes it can be helpful. Anyway, we can save it, let it be. And with velocity, if you go here to my fields, you can see that now velocity, when we use the dop import fields, separated into 3 different channels. So inside of my source, if we create velocities here, you can see that velocity is one channel, which is vector. So that's not channel, sorry, field, which is vector. And here we have not 3 fields. We have basically 5 fields, because velocity is separated into 3 different float fields. And sometimes it's getting too many space, because density and temperature field is less than 1 velocity field, because we have 3 velocities. And I like to use velocity as a motion vector for creating a nice motion blur in a render, because sometimes volumetric simulation creates more interesting blur on render, rather than you can like transfer the motion vectors using different passes and try to apply this vector blur in compositing stuff like Nuke or After Effects. And it's create a linear motion blur, because you can create the radial motion blur or create a nice curve line for the motion. So I prefer to use the real motion blur with render if we need to, okay? So sometimes it's very, very consuming stuff. But anyway, if you want to use velocity, we can make a little resample for this velocity. So we can reduce the quality of velocity. We don't need to get a velocity from each pixel, from each voxel, because there is like a 70 million voxels, okay? 72 million voxels. So I don't want to have such huge detail for the velocity. So what we can do, we can use a blast node, or even not a blast. We can use a split node. Add a split node. And let's go to name val dot star. And what do we have? Let's add a null object. If you connect our null object to the first input, we can see that we have just the velocity fields, both, actually not both, all those three, one, x, y, and z. And if you connect our null object to the second input, we will have all fields except the velocity, so density and temperature. So now what I want to do, I want to add a volume resize, or resample node. And now what I can do, I can grab my velocities. So there is just the velocities here. We can type a source group anyway. And I want to reduce the resolution like 4 times, 0.25. Now we're going to have velocity just 1,125,000 voxels for each day. So it's less than it was, and it definitely will have we will spend less space for the saving of information. Okay, so we get back our velocity into the density. So now we have like again all those fields, but velocity is much smaller. Okay, now let's add a file cache node. So file cache, let's rename it maybe to the smoke or smoke version 1. If you have a few versions, sometimes it can be helpful, and I don't like to use a heap name. And the heap name, the reason because I prefer to add the versions in my project name, and when we use a heap name, it's always grab a version from this project. And sometimes when you resave the new version and you had a lot of caching, I don't know, when you work with the destruction, with the sourcing, you can try to cache this out to work it a little bit faster, and then, oh my god, you need to recache it again, and not recache, you need to reset your geometry file to the new name, and etc, etc. So it's take a lot of time, so I prefer to delete heap file here just using the name of the node. And if you want to play with the versions, you can add it here. So now if you press the middle mouse button, you can see that we have a Parabase Geo Smoke version 1 and the frame number and the bgeo.sc. That's what we should have. And by default, as you can see, my fire cache is appearing with some default settings, like missing frame, I have no geometry. So I don't care about geometry. If there is no information, I don't need an error. And the checkbox load from disk, because mainly when I add a file cache, I create a file, I create a cache, and I want to look at this cache and not again go to simulation. So what we need is just to make simulation. So I save it to file, the all range from 1 to 144. And I will use the save on disk on background. And to do that, I go to file, save, and save to disk on background. This is important because without a saving, it's can say, okay, perform background and is unsaved changes. I don't know what changes I just made, but again, save. And now press the button. It can ask you for a scheduler. So let me just quick, 0.05, that should be fine. That should be fine. So now it's working on the background, and you can, work with your project, create a new version for this project, and go ahead to make some changes here, or use this cache because it already created. If you go here to our smoke is creating the first cache, and 4 frames we have already. Anyway, we will wait, and we're gonna work with this cache to apply the shader. This is our final result. Make 130 frames. And this is how the smoke is looking here. It's pretty nice. And let's see, I make a few changes over there, and here's all the same. But if you go to the smoke, I can show you a few stuff I changed here. The first thing I changed inside of my parasolver, I removed the dissipation, so there's no dissipation. and enable the shading with the default settings. Basically, I use the shading for the fire, but in my case, I want to make like more like I want to avoid the smooth surface, so I added a little bit of shading to create a bigger amount of detail. And another thing, I turn on 3 different disturbances. So we have 1, 2, and 3, and they have a different block size. If you look here, I have the biggest block size by default is 0.3, and the smaller 0.1, and the smaller one is 0.05. With the 0.05, I set a disturbance like 0.5, so it's the smallest influence. And I have influence for 0.1, and I make an animation. So if you look on our curve, in frame 72, so here, we have a influence like 0.75, the big one, and frame 120, I decrease this to 0.3, you can see here. And the reason for that, because I have a lot of disturbance when the large smoke areas, they became very noisy. They became very, blurry because of the high disturbance value. The same stuff with the block size 0.3. I add a big disturbance too over here, and reason for that, because again, I want to separate my, let's get back here. I want to make a bigger disturbance in this stage when we have the main plume is going from the source. And that's why I want to increase my disturbance for the big scale, and I set a bigger value, it's like 2. And again, animate it to 0, value in frame 48. So somewhere here in frame 48, I don't need a huge disturbance, so you can see that we have a nice clouds here, nice dust clouds with the big amount of details, and you can see this plume of the smoke with a nice disturbance on the shape. And the last one is the basic disturbance. In fact, I'm not using the velocity over here. I use the default setup, the default temperature. Disturb field is temperature, and I add the bigger cutoff. So cutoff is like 0.5, and the small block size is just to add more detail in the temperature. So, and all other is the same, so it's like confinement, and I make a simulation with the division size 0.05, and that's how it's looking now. You can see this amount of detail. But again, it's like a preview, so it's not, we can't see all the details, but anyway, you can see how it's looking on a preview now. And in my first frame, I has like 220,000 million voxels, so it's pretty much. So I changed my container like this, so I have a lot of smoke here moving to the camera, and I avoid the big smoke going on the back sides. I can't see this smoke, so I try to decrease the size of my container as much as I can. Okay, so I have 32 meters on the X, 27 on Y, and 32 on the X. Okay, so going to main camera, and that's what we have for now. And I pre-cached the simulation. And now let's talk about rendering setup, how we can use this simulation for rendering.